Even though it's almost all that I do, Vérité films constantly amaze me. Do you ever wonder how in the world they got the access they did? Was it pure luck, or was it something else that allowed them to capture that specific shot or scene? What did they shoot it on, and how big was their crew? I always wish I could just sit down and pick the brains of the people that shot some of my favorite films or series. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the process of shooting the hardest thing I've ever shot, Showtime's The Trade. As the series cinematographer, I'll take you inside the 5-part series that follows 3 parallel storylines of the opioid epidemic. There were so many challenges in shooting this series, and the struggles were harder than anything I could have imagined. But I'm incredibly proud of the end result, and I look forward to taking you through the process of shooting The Trade. The Trade is basically a follow-up to Cartel Land, and it takes a deeper look into the drug trade in the United States. The story interweaves the Mexican drug cartels who are producing and distributing, law enforcement who are overwhelmed with the number of convictions and overdoses, and those struggling with addiction, as well as their families who are left to feel the real consequences. This concept presents a lot of logistical challenges. How do we get access? How do we maintain that access? And how can we be ready to capture anything and everything that comes our way at the drop of a hat? Since we were going to have 3 different storylines that were constantly evolving across 2 different countries, we knew that we couldn't have just a single crew that was bouncing from place to place. Logistically, that just wouldn't be possible. But we also knew that we needed to have a small crew size, because a small crew size will allow you to work faster and be more nimble to respond to things as they're happening. But it also is going to help with the trust building process, because access is going to be a huge component of this project. We also knew that we needed to keep our crew size small, because a smaller crew is going to help you work faster and be more nimble to respond to things as they're happening. But it's also going to help with the trust building process, which is going to be a huge component of this project. Based on who we are going to be filming with, right, the drug cartels, law enforcement, and people struggling with addiction, we didn't want to have new faces constantly popping up. So we wanted to keep consistency across who our crews were. And so what that meant was finding a crew who would be dedicated to the one storyline and be on the project from beginning to end. So it definitely took some time to figure out who these crews were going to be, because there was a very specific set of criteria that we were looking for. When it came to the cinematographer, we needed someone who was well-versed in Vérité. We needed someone who was comfortable working in a small crew and sometimes even on their own. And we needed someone who was comfortable running their own sound, because we were not going to have sound recordists on this project to be able to keep that consistency across our teams. And then we obviously needed a producer. And the producer was going to be in charge of building the relationships, establishing the trust, getting access, and effectively being our director on the ground. You know, we would have a full support team back in New York, led by our showrunner, Pagan Harlman, and our director, Matthew Heineman. But they were looking at things from kind of a higher level and connecting the 3 teams together, seeing what each one's getting, and kind of telling us things to look for based on what other teams are getting. But on the ground, we were effectively left to our own devices to be able to build those stories and follow those stories. So the 3 teams ended up breaking out like this. In Mexico, we had Max Price as the cinematographer. Ross McDonald came in for the second half. And the producer in Mexico was Miles Esty. And Miles was our producer on Cartel Land. In law enforcement, we had Peter Hutchins, who was our cinematographer, and Brent Kunkel was our producer. And then with the people struggling with addiction and their families, Damon Tabor was the producer, who had written the Rolling Stone article that Cartel Land was based on. And I was the cinematographer on that team. And so between the 3 of us, we were effectively on the ground, finding the stories, developing the stories, and running with those stories, all led by the team back in New York. From my perspective, at least starting out, the biggest challenge with this setup was, how do we create a unified look for this show? We want to make sure that there's a visual consistency across all 3 storylines and all 3 locations. But the 3 of us, A, had never worked together before, and B, even if we had, we weren't going to be in the same place at the same time to be able to compare notes, to be able to discuss how to get a certain shot, right? I mean, we're just out there on our own doing what it is that we need to do to get the scene and get the shot. And so we had to create some kind of an approach that all three of us could live by to be able to keep visual consistency while also letting us do what it is that we knew that we needed to do and respond to things in the way that our instincts wanted us to. And so coming up with that approach was the first challenge in how to shoot this show. I think out of both necessity, but also as a great way to kind of channel us into a unified way of shooting, was creating a specific set of guidelines for what equipment we would have access to and what we would all be using, and keeping that consistent across those three teams. So in building out our camera package, we settled on the Canon C300 Mark II. For us, the Canon C300 series was the best choice, both from an ergonomic standpoint. It was small, it was adaptable, and it just fit into our way of working. But it was also perfect for being able to straddle all the different challenges that we'd come up with, right? From low light to bright, high dynamic range scenes, to cold weather in Ohio, to hot weather in Mexico. This camera we knew could stand up to the rigors of what this shoot was going to be. And then with our camera, we had a very tight and restricted lens package. The three of us would travel with the Canon 17-55, the Canon 24-105, and the Canon 70-200. So all still lenses, because they're small, you can carry all three of them in a pouch, and you've got a full range to work with. And then we also, did in specific situations allow crews to have either a 24 or a 50 millimeter prime for incredibly low light scenes, especially in law enforcement, who was spending a lot of time out on, stakeouts at night in cars, things like that. And so being able to have a faster aperture was helpful for that. But generally speaking, we all limited ourselves to one camera and those three lenses. And then in addition to the camera and lenses, the three of us would have a light panels Astra, and that was our only light. And that was really only used for doing interviews. Pretty much everything was natural light. We didn't light anything. And just that one Astra was something that was easy to pack. And if we needed to pull it out, then we had access to it. But everything that we were doing was pure Vérité, camera lens, and working in the natural environment. And then when it came to sounds, since we didn't have sound recorders with us and we'd be managing that ourselves, we each had two lavs. We had a Schoeps CMIT-5 that was our camera mic, which again is just an incredible choice for being able to pick up dialogue in kind of noisy, crowded scenes. And then we had a wireless boom. And if we needed to use this, then the producer would operate that boom and we would control the levels. So if you also want to learn more about kind of the audio configurations for this and a lot of the other things that I've done, I did a whole video on camera audio configuration. So again, you can find a link to that here or in the description. And these are just good supporting videos to kind of help better understand what it is that we were doing and how we were doing it on this project. All the stories that we would be following across all three teams, were constantly keeping us on the move. And this didn't really give us a lot of time for rebuilds and specific setups. So having a very limited camera package was a necessity because we would need to carry all this stuff on our backs, right? I mean, we would be getting in and out of cars, we would be walking, we'd be hiking, we'd be changing locations constantly. And so we needed something that we had easy access to everything that we had available to us on us at all times. And so ultimately, both by design, but also by necessity, by having this very specific and limited gear package forced all of us into a kind of unified style, right? We all had minimal things to work with. We all had the same minimal things to work with. And so what it did by not having a bunch of options available to us is it forced all of us to just rely on our Vérité instincts to get what it was that we needed to do. And the look of the show really started to evolve out of those limitations of gear. Another element that really helped give this show a cohesive visual look was the use of perspective. We always wanted a singular approach that was told from the perspective of our subject. What that meant was we would never bring in multiple cameras for a scene, regardless of how big it was. We always wanted to approach the scene through the eyes of the subject who was living it. And what that meant was the audience would gain the information at the same rate that our subject was. And so an example of this was, I remember having a conversation with Peter Hutchins, our cinematographer in Ohio with law enforcement. And Detective Edwards, one of their subjects there, was leading a police raid. So we were trying to figure out the best way to approach this. And, at first we were thinking, let's send cameras with the SWAT team as they go in and they're raiding the house. Let's have another camera with Detective Edwards in the car. So that, we can see what's happening inside the house. We can be with Edwards as he's hearing the information passed back to him. But then we decided, it really makes more sense to just be in the car with Edwards. He's wondering what's happening as SWAT's going in. And it's not until that information is passed to him that the audience knows what's happening. This not only helped the structure of the way that we were going to build that story, but it was also going to help our logistical approach to shooting that story. So with that one camera, Peter was able to capture the SWAT team arriving, going into the house, and then just sitting with Detective Edwards in the car and hearing him learn information as it was coming through to him. This not only gave us a singular perspective that focused the audience in on what's happening, but it also allowed Peter to cover it with a single camera. Beyond all the logistical challenges that we were talking about, trust building and access was the greatest challenge of this show. This is why we kept our crews consistent. And with that consistency, it meant that we were all only on this project for nearly a year of production. We were on call 24/7 because having that consistent crew meant that we were able to build those relationships to allow people to open themselves up to us and the camera in what were the darkest moments of their life. And, the process of building that trust for some took a long time. In Mexico with the cartels, Max and Miles didn't start recording for weeks and weeks after being on the ground. It took that long for just spending time with people and building those relationships before they felt comfortable enough to have the cameras come out. But, on the other hand, one of the more dramatic scenes that I got with Skylar and his family happened only a couple days after meeting them. And this is really the importance of just being on the ground, is you never know when something's going to happen. And so you have to just be there all the time and be patient to allow yourselves to be able to get those moments. It's really not until that trust building has been established that you become a known entity and you can start to disappear and blend into the scene. And this is when you can start to get really incredible and powerful moments. Things like following someone all day and all night, ending up in a hotel room, watching people use heroin and seeing the full life cycle of addiction playing out right in front of you. Or just sitting in someone's living room and seeing the subtle details that really help explain the nuance of what's happening. Because what we're doing is we are not here to exploit or take advantage of the situation, but really being able to present it as truthfully and realistically as possible to the audience so they understand both the good and the bad of what's happening. I did a whole video on building trust with your subjects as well, where we look at different techniques and tips and suggestions of how to build those relationships and establish that trust with the people that you're spending time with. Filming the trade was the hardest thing that I've ever done. And I think I can speak for the other cinematographers involved as well. The show was not only physically demanding, but emotionally draining as well. I had been steeped in Vérité filmmaking for a while at this point, but the show really showed me how to emotionally convey a story to my audience, how to connect with my subjects, and how to depict them fairly on camera. This show really taught me the value of empathy and how to have a judgment-free approach to my cinematography. I'm incredibly proud of the work that everyone did on this show. And I hope that this breakdown was helpful for you as you find ways to connect your audience to the stories that you're telling. If you'd like to learn even more about the cinematography of the trade and hear from the other cinematographers involved, be sure to read the American Cinematographer article about our process. And if you have specific questions about how to approach a project that you're working on, or need additional guidance on building out your camera package that you can't get from just watching these videos, you can schedule a one-on-one call with me where we'll go through and discuss any challenges that you might be facing. You can find links for both of those in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I post a new video each week covering all aspects of documentary cinematography. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.